It was supposed to be a normal day at the courthouse. Routine hearings, traffic fines, petty disputes, nothing that would make the news, nothing that would change lives. And yet, by the end of that afternoon, a federal investigation would be launched. A judge would lose his robe in disgrace, and one young black man, underestimated and mocked in front of hundreds, would rewrite the rules of the very system built to crush him. It didn't happen with a protest. It didn't happen with a lawyer pounding their fist on the bench. It happened quietly, almost invisibly. It happened the moment Judge Robert Holloway, with a smirk tugging at his lips, looked Jamal King dead in the eyes and decided, without evidence, without even a fair chance, that he wasn't worthy of respect. "If you want to be taken seriously in my courtroom," the judge sneered, his voice sharp enough to cut, "you might want to leave your hood attitude outside." The room had fallen into a silence so deep it felt like even the walls were holding their breath. Jamal stood there, 24 years old, a suit that didn't fit quite right, a public defender who barely looked up from his papers, and a courtroom full of strangers ready to laugh, to whisper, to judge. He could have exploded in anger. He could have turned around and walked away. He could have accepted the weight of yet another injustice thrown at him. But instead, Jamal King did something no one expected. He smiled, just slightly, just enough to make the judge shift in his seat, and in that moment, the story truly began. Because what no one knew, what Judge Holloway could never have imagined, was that the young man standing before him was recording, not just the words, not just the insult, but the faces, the reactions, the bias that dripped from every corner of that room like sweat on a summer day. And Jamal wasn't recording it to share it on social media. He was gathering evidence for a case that would shake the entire state. How would you have reacted in Jamal's place? Stay silent or fight back with quiet precision? Think about it. Because this wasn't just a courtroom hearing. This was a battlefield. And Jamal King had just made his first move. The courtroom shifted back into motion like a machine rebooting itself. Whispers filled the air, papers shuffled, and the judge, clearing his throat, tried to snap the moment back under control. "Proceed," he said curtly, waving his hand like Jamal was a mosquito buzzing too close. But Jamal wasn't just another nuisance. He was building something. He stepped forward to the defense table, moving with a calm so unnerving that even the prosecution side took notice. There was no anger in his posture, no defiance in his voice when he spoke, only a razor-sharp clarity. "Your Honor," Jamal began, his tone respectful, but carrying an undeniable weight. "Before we proceed, I'd like to request that today's proceedings be officially transcribed and the court's surveillance recordings preserved as part of the case record." For a second, Judge Holloway blinked. The request wasn't unusual, on paper, but something in Jamal's delivery sent a ripple through the room. "Everything is already being recorded, Mr. King," the judge said, his irritation barely hidden. Jamal didn't flinch. "Respectfully, sir," he said, locking eyes with the judge. "Given the nature of your earlier comment and its potential relevance to the fairness of these proceedings, I believe it's in everyone's best interest to ensure an unaltered record is maintained." A few spectators leaned forward in their seats. Even the stenographer paused, her fingers hovering above the keys. For the first time, the balance shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The judge wasn't the only one in control anymore. Jamal had drawn a line in the sand with nothing but calm words and quiet persistence. The judge's jaw tightened. "Very well," he muttered, signaling to the court clerk. "Proceed." But Jamal knew something the judge didn't. That comment, the one so casually thrown out, would be the thread that unraveled everything, because Jamal wasn't just fighting for himself. He was about to shine a light on a pattern, one hidden in plain sight for years. Do you believe a single moment, a single comment, can bring down a giant? Sometimes all it takes is one spark, and Jamal King had just struck the match. Jamal turned toward the jury, letting the heavy silence hang just a moment longer than necessary. He didn't speak immediately. He let them feel the shift that had just occurred, like the aftershock of a subtle earthquake. The jurors, a carefully selected group that had initially seemed uninterested, were now visibly more attentive. Some leaned forward, others clasped their hands tighter in their laps. It wasn't just Jamal's words that held them. It was the calm certainty in his body language, the unshakable presence of a man who had nothing left to lose, except his dignity. Slowly, Jamal opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a neatly organized stack of documents. No dramatic gestures, no theatrics, just precision. "Exhibit A," he said, handing a file to the court officer, who in turn passed it to the judge. "The preliminary arrest report." The judge flipped through it, eyebrows knitting. Jamal waited until the silence thickened again. "And Exhibit B," Jamal continued, his voice unwavering. "An internal memorandum from the police department's own disciplinary records that were conveniently not disclosed during discovery." A low murmur ran through the courtroom. The prosecution team shuffled uncomfortably in their seats. Judge Holloway's face darkened. "Mr. King, are you accusing the police department of misconduct?" Jamal didn't blink. "No, Your Honor," he said, his tone razor-sharp. "I'm presenting evidence. It will be up to the court to decide what to call it." From the gallery, someone coughed nervously. Even those who had come to watch casually now sensed that this wasn't going to be a routine hearing. Something deeper, uglier, was about to be exposed. Jamal stepped back from the defense table, folding his hands loosely in front of him. It wasn't just about his case anymore. It was about something that had infected this town's justice system for years. And now, for the first time, someone was holding a mirror up to it, and the reflection wasn't pretty. The judge set the files down with a deliberate slowness that made every eye in the room gravitate toward her. The sound of paper brushing against the hardwood bench echoed faintly, somehow louder than it should have been. Judge Holloway tapped her pen against the folder once, twice, 3 times. Each tap felt like a drumbeat, announcing that something had shifted irreversibly. "Prosecution," she said, her voice crisp. "Approach the bench." The district attorney, a broad-shouldered man named Robert Langston, rose stiffly from his seat. He exchanged a brief, tense glance with his team before striding forward, every step betraying the unease he tried so hard to mask. Jamal stayed where he was, arms crossed lightly. From where he stood, he could see the beads of sweat beginning to form at Langston's temple. Whispers rippled through the courtroom like a rising tide. Spectators elbowed each other, journalists scribbled frantic notes, and even the jurors glanced around with furtive curiosity. At the bench, hushed words passed between Langston and the judge. No one could hear them clearly, but body language spoke louder than words. Judge Holloway's expression hardened. Langston's shoulders sank. Whatever was in those documents, it was bad enough to rattle the people who believed themselves untouchable. Jamal leaned forward slightly, catching just a fragment of the conversation. "You were obligated to disclose this," the judge hissed under her breath, barely audible even in the charged silence. Langston's mouth moved rapidly in response, but his excuses were little more than desperate noise. After a long, loaded pause, the judge spoke aloud, her voice slicing clean through the tension. "Court will recess for 30 minutes. Both parties in my chambers now." She banged her gavel once, but the crack of wood sounded more like a warning shot than a formality. The room erupted, not in noise but in kinetic energy. People straightened in their seats, phones came out, heads turned. Jamal gathered his notes slowly, methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. Inside, he could feel it. The walls they had built against him, walls built from lies and prejudice, were starting to crumble. Not with explosions, not with shouting, but with something much more terrifying to them. Evidence, and the unshakable resolve of a man who knew this fight wasn't just his own. He caught a glimpse of a young boy sitting in the back row with his mother, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, absorbing every second. Maybe today, Jamal thought, that boy would see something different. Maybe today he wouldn't learn to expect injustice as a fact of life. As Langston trudged back to his seat, defeated for now, Jamal simply adjusted his tie and turned to face the room. The storm was still building, but now they all knew it was coming. As the heavy doors of the courtroom swung closed behind him, Jamal found himself standing alone in the narrow hallway. The muted chatter inside faded into a distant hum, swallowed by the thick marble walls. He let out a slow breath, his palm brushing absently against the smooth, worn leather of his briefcase. For a fleeting moment, the weight of the day lifted, and in its place, a memory rose, unbidden, from deep within. It was the smell that triggered it first, the faint aroma of polished wood and aged books, just like the library where his mother used to take him after school. He could see it so vividly now, himself as a small boy, no older than 8, his legs dangling from a too-tall chair, while his mother leaned in close, her voice soft but firm. "You have to be better, Jamal. Twice as good. Maybe even 3 times. Not fair, but it's the truth." Her hand had rested gently over his, steadying the pencil he clutched too tightly. Because when you walk into a room, they're not just going to see a smart kid. They're going to see what they want to see. You make them see what's real. You hear me, baby? He had nodded back then, not fully understanding. But now, every cell in his body carried that truth like it was stitched into his bones. Jamal blinked hard, clearing the mist from his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't standing in some courthouse lined with silent portraits of old judges. He was standing in a line that stretched back generations, a line of people who had fought and bled and believed, even when belief seemed impossible. He straightened his shoulders. There was no room for doubt, not here, not now. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. The bailiff motioning for him to re-enter. The 30-minute recess was almost over. Jamal turned back toward the courtroom doors, his grip tightening around his briefcase. Every move he made, every word he spoke in the minutes to come, would carry the weight of history behind it, and he intended to make that history proud. The boy who once clutched a pencil too tight was now about to clutch something far more powerful: the truth. The heavy silence in the courtroom was nearly unbearable. Jamal could feel the eyes of everyone, every single person in the room, focused solely on him. They weren't just waiting for him to speak, they were waiting for him to do something more. He swallowed hard, the sound almost deafening in his ears. His palms were slick with sweat, his grip tightening around the edges of his desk. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, like the beat of his heart, each second stretching out into an eternity. Judge Harris's gaze never wavered from him as she leaned forward, her stern expression offering no hint of leniency. Her voice rang out across the courtroom. "Mr. Williams, you may present your case." Jamal's throat tightened as he stood, straightening his suit jacket, adjusting his tie. He tried to steady himself, but everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. The years of preparation, the countless late nights reviewing case files, the endless discussions with his team, all led to this exact moment. He had worked tirelessly for this. He had to get it right. Taking a deep breath, he walked toward the podium, every step feeling like an impossible weight on his shoulders. His heart raced, but his mind was focused. Jamal placed his notes down carefully, giving one last glance at the jury, their eyes filled with varying degrees of skepticism. But he knew something they didn't. He knew the power of the truth, and the truth was with him. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of raw emotion. "I stand before you today not just as a lawyer, but as a son, as a man whose family has fought for justice for generations." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, his gaze shifting from the jury to the judge. This case isn't just about the actions of one person. It's about the system that enables those actions, the system that allows people to be treated differently based on their skin color, their background, their history. A murmur spread through the courtroom, but Jamal remained unfazed. This wasn't the time to soften his words. It was time to speak the truth in all its uncomfortable, inconvenient glory. The defendant may stand here today behind the veil of privilege, pretending as though nothing has happened, as though this case is just another formality. But I assure you, it is not. This is about far more than what happened on that day. This is about the lives of every person who has been marginalized, dismissed, and ignored by this system. His hands trembled slightly as he held the podium, but his words grew stronger with each sentence. We are not just fighting for one person's life. We are fighting for the lives of everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. We are fighting for a future where color, background, and race don't determine who gets justice. He looked at the jury again, his eyes piercing. You have the power to make a change. You have the power to set things right. Jamal's voice was filled with conviction as he let the silence in the room speak louder than anything he could say. And I trust that when the time comes, you will choose justice over prejudice. You will choose truth over bias. As he finished, Jamal stepped back from the podium, his heart still pounding in his chest. The courtroom was silent, every person waiting for the next move. But Jamal knew, deep down, that the battle had only just begun. And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just a fight for his client. This was a fight for something bigger, something that had been ignored for far too long. As Jamal returned to his seat, the tension in the courtroom crackled like electricity in a summer storm. The jury shifted uncomfortably, a few exchanging glances, their rigid expressions cracking under the weight of his words. Judge Harris, maintaining her stoic demeanor, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if silently acknowledging the gravity of what had just been laid bare. Opposing counsel, a sharply dressed man with steel-gray hair named Richard Calloway, rose slowly from his seat. There was an undeniable smugness in the way he buttoned his jacket, adjusting his tie before striding to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and confident, "you just heard a very passionate speech." He paused dramatically, flashing the jury a thin smile. But passion is not evidence. Sympathy is not fact. And emotion. He leaned slightly forward, his tone darkening. Emotion does not prove guilt or innocence. The room felt colder somehow, as if his words sucked the very air out of the space. Jamal clenched his fists beneath the table, every fiber of his being screaming at the blatant manipulation unfolding before him. "My client," Calloway continued, his voice dripping with performative outrage, "is a respected member of this community, a philanthropist, a family man, a man whose reputation has been dragged through the mud by baseless accusations and conspiracy theories." Jamal's jaw tightened. He had expected this tactic, the glorification of the privileged, the sanctification of a man who would never face the world the same way Jamal did every single day. The jurors listened, but there was a noticeable shift. They weren't leaning in the way they had during Jamal's opening statement. They weren't captivated. They were skeptical. Something had changed, and Jamal knew it. He allowed himself a small, controlled breath. He wasn't alone in this room anymore. The truth had found a foothold. Meanwhile, from the gallery, Jamal's mother, an aging woman with silver streaks threading through her tightly coiled hair, sat silently, clutching a worn Bible to her chest. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence alone was a declaration, a reminder that Jamal stood on the shoulders of those who fought battles he could barely comprehend. And just 2 rows behind her, hidden among the spectators, was a young girl no older than 16. She had come to watch this trial, drawn not by the drama, but by hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, the system could work for someone like her someday. Jamal's eyes flicked briefly toward them, and in that split second, he remembered exactly why he had chosen this path. It wasn't just about his client. It was about every nameless, voiceless soul who had ever been told they were less. Have you ever witnessed a courtroom where the stakes weren't just about winning or losing, but about rewriting the very rules we live by? Because that's what was unfolding here. And as the gavel rapped sharply, signaling a brief recess, Jamal knew. The real trial had just begun. Not just in the courtroom, but in every heart watching. The courtroom doors swung open as the judge exited for recess. But no one moved. It was as if an invisible weight pinned everyone to their seats. A storm was brewing, and they all knew it. Jamal remained seated, his fingers steepled in front of his lips, deep in thought. His opponent's words still echoed in the air, slick and polished, designed to confuse and manipulate. But Jamal wasn't here to play by their rules. He was here to change the rules altogether. Across the aisle, Mr. Whitmore, the man accused of racially motivated assault, sat stoically beside his defense team. His suit was pressed, his silver cufflinks gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his face wore the kind of calm that only came from years of being untouchable. A pillar of the community, they called him, a donor to charities, a guest of honor at galas, a man whose handshake still carried more weight than any contract. But beneath that polished exterior, Jamal could see it, the flicker of fear. He knew Whitmore wasn't worried about the legal system. He was worried about something far more dangerous. He was worried about the truth. Because when the truth comes out, no amount of money, influence, or country club membership can build a wall high enough to keep it out. From the corner of his eye, Jamal noticed two reporters whispering urgently, their pens scribbling furious notes. This case wasn't just about justice anymore. It was becoming a symbol, a reckoning, and Jamal welcomed it. He slowly rose from his seat and made his way toward the hallway outside the courtroom. Every step he took seemed to echo off the marbled walls, a slow, steady drumbeat of defiance. Outside, the corridors buzzed with nervous energy. Lawyers checked their phones. Family members huddled in tense groups. Security guards adjusted their belts. Jamal leaned against a cold stone pillar, pulling out a battered notebook from his briefcase, the same one he'd carried since law school. Inside it were notes, quotes, reminders, pieces of wisdom passed down from mentors who had warned him that one day he would find himself standing exactly here, at the tipping point between courage and despair. He flipped through the pages until his eyes landed on a sentence, written in bold, uneven handwriting. The law is only as strong as the people who demand it be fair. He closed the notebook gently, the weight of those words sinking into his chest. What would you do? Jamal thought, staring out the window at the overcast sky. If you knew the system was rigged against you from the start, would you accept it? Would you walk away? Or would you stand and fight, even when you knew the odds? That's what this trial had become. A question that every juror, every spectator, every person watching would have to answer. Not with their words, but with their verdict. And maybe, just maybe, justice wouldn't be decided inside these walls. But in the hearts that left this building changed. The courtroom was buzzing again as the judge re-entered, robes flowing, face a tight mask of professionalism. The gavel struck the desk, sharp, commanding, snapping everyone back into rigid attention. All rise, the bailiff called out, and the room stood as one. As Jamal slid back into his seat, he could feel the subtle change. The energy had shifted. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a battle for something bigger. The prosecution rose first, laying out dry procedural matters, almost lulling the room into a false sense of routine. But when Jamal stood, clearing his throat, the very air seemed to tighten. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. Instead, he spoke in a steady, low voice that demanded attention without asking for it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jamal began, locking eyes with them one by one. "I want you to imagine something." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and deliberate. "I want you to imagine walking into a room and being judged before you even say a word, before you move, before you breathe." He paused. "Not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some crossed their arms. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jamal pressed forward. "Imagine every action you take, every mistake you might make, being used against you, twisted into a story about how you were dangerous, how you were less, how you didn't belong." He stepped closer to the jury box, his voice barely above a whisper now, forcing them to lean in. "Now, imagine that the people doing this to you wore a badge of honor, a title, a legacy." He let the silence settle, a silence so thick it felt almost suffocating. Mr. Whitmore isn't just a man accused of assault, Jamal said finally, his tone sharpening. He's a man who weaponized prejudice, who used his privilege as a shield, and who believed, deep down, that no one would dare hold him accountable. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the defense table where Whitmore sat, hands clenched white against the polished wood. Jamal didn't need to raise his voice. The truth was loud enough. "But here's the thing about power built on fear," he said. "It crumbles the moment people stop being afraid." At that moment, Jamal's gaze swept over the jury, planting seeds of courage, one heart at a time. He could see it, the shift, the way some jurors leaned forward, jaws set, the way others exchanged glances, questions burning in their eyes. The defense attorney objected half-heartedly, "Your Honor, relevance." But it was too late. The words had already sunk in. The truth had already landed. The judge overruled the objection with a curt nod, his face unreadable. Jamal stepped back to his table, every step deliberate, knowing he had struck the nerve he needed. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because justice wasn't a guarantee. It never had been. It was something you fought for, every second, every breath, every ounce of strength you had. And Jamal was prepared to fight until the very last one. The courtroom settled into an eerie kind of stillness after Jamal's closing words. It wasn't silence born of boredom. It was the silence of impact, of walls cracking, of minds wrestling with truths too long ignored. Jamal lowered himself into his seat slowly, his every move weighted by the gravity of the moment. Across the aisle, the defense attorney shuffled papers in vain, as if by rustling noise alone he could sweep away the damage that had been done. But some things can't be undone, especially not when the truth has already found a voice. The judge addressed the jury, giving the final procedural instructions. Standard words about evidence, about reasonable doubt. But even the judge's tone seemed different now, less mechanical, more careful. The jury rose and filed out of the room, every face taut with the weight of responsibility. No one looked at Whitmore. Whitmore, for his part, sat rigid, his jaw locked so tightly that the veins in his neck pulsed visibly. The man who had once moved through the world with unshakable entitlement now looked like a figure crumbling under its own myth. And Jamal? He didn't glance at Whitmore even once. He kept his gaze trained forward, steady, patient, because he understood. Battles aren't won in explosions. They are won in the quiet wait, afterward. The clock ticked. The gallery whispered. Outside, the late afternoon sun slipped lower behind the courthouse windows, staining the room gold and crimson. Hours passed. When the bailiff finally re-entered and called, "All rise," the energy in the room snapped taut again like a drawn bow. The jury returned, tense, tight, focused. One juror, an older black woman in a neat gray suit, held the verdict slip in shaking hands. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" A nod. The slip was passed forward. Jamal didn't move, didn't even blink. He knew whatever came next would echo far beyond these walls. The judge opened the slip, his face unreadable for a beat that stretched into forever. "In the matter of the Commonwealth versus Richard Whitmore," the judge began, voice steady but heavy. "On the charge of assault with intent, the jury finds the defendant guilty." The word landed like a thunderclap, not shouted, not dramatic, but final, irrevocable. Whitmore's shoulders slumped as if the floor had given way beneath him. Behind Jamal, someone let out a ragged breath, an unplanned gasp of relief. Whitmore's lawyer jumped to his feet, demanding a mistrial, citing bias, anything he could throw at the wind, but the judge simply banged the gavel once. "Order in the court." The defense attorney's voice faded like smoke. Useless. Already gone. The gavel struck again. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. And just like that, the case was over. But the impact was only beginning. As people filed out of the courtroom, Jamal remained seated for a moment longer, drinking in the rare and precious feeling that justice, real justice, had won today. Not because the system worked, but because someone dared to fight inside it. The gavel slammed down one last time, echoing like thunder in the packed courtroom. It was over. Jamal stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight lift off his chest. Around him, his family burst into tears, rushing to hug him. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with reporters. Flashes erupted as Jamal emerged, steady and proud. He didn't shy away from the microphones. He simply said, "Today is just one step. True justice takes more than a verdict." The crowd roared in support, but Jamal knew this was only the beginning. News of the trial spread like wildfire. Across TV screens and social media feeds, Jamal's face became a symbol, not of pity, but of strength. People everywhere debated what had happened. Was it just one case, or proof of something much bigger? Meanwhile, Jamal received invitations from universities, civil rights groups, even politicians wanting to stand beside him. But he wasn't chasing fame. He had only one goal: to make sure no one else would ever have to stand where he had stood. His fight was just beginning. And this time, it wasn't just for himself. The final day of the trial didn't end with a gavel slam or a quick handshake. It ended with a standing ovation. As the judge read the verdict, the courtroom held its breath. Both officers were found guilty, not just of wrongful arrest, but of racial profiling and abuse of power. Gasps echoed against the marble walls, then applause broke out like thunder. Even the reporters, usually stone-faced, struggled to keep their emotions in check. Jamal sat still for a moment, absorbing it all. Not because he was surprised, but because deep down he had always known the truth would find its way to the surface. As he walked out of the courthouse, dozens of cameras flashed in his face. He wasn't looking for attention. He was looking past it, at the young kids standing on the courthouse steps, holding signs that read, "Justice for all. Change starts here. Thank you, Jamal." He smiled, not for the victory, but for the future it represented. The same officers who had once smirked at him were now led away in handcuffs, heads bowed, their power stripped, their arrogance shattered. Standing there in the sunlight, Jamal finally allowed himself to exhale, not with anger, not even with pride, but with a quiet, steady peace. He had changed the story. He had changed his story. And maybe, just maybe, he had helped change the future too. And now, let me ask you, do you think real change starts with one brave voice? Or does it take an entire storm to wake the world up? Tell me your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what you believe. And if you want to hear more powerful stories like Jamal's, don't forget to subscribe and join us. We're just getting started.